I am pleased to welcome Aniruth.
Imagine, you've been waiting so long for a speaker to finally start talking, and then they come up, and then they list up their ideas. They're great, they're wonderful ideas. You wish you had thought of them before. But they're also cluttered and disorganized, and it's all just a bunch of facts put together randomly. And you're trying to keep with them, and you're trying to follow them. But as they continue, their speech sounds more and more boring, and you think to yourself, I should probably listen, but I know I'm not going to. Has that ever happened to you? You ever listen to a speech and you wonder, why is it so uninteresting? Why am I not captivated? The answer is simple, folks. Organization. Because organization is not just about the order in which you put things, but it's about the reasons as to why you do so. And the reasons why you do so is very, very important. My name is Aniruth Narayanan. As the Toastmaster today mentioned in that very, very long introduction, a lot of the techniques and tips that I'm going to talk about, I have used for my own personal success. So I highly encourage you all to write them down and take some notes. Beyond that, I do want to mention two things before I begin. The first, you may notice that there's just a wall behind me and that there's nothing currently projected onto it. And I wanted to mention this because I know that a lot of the times when people present, they feel the need to use a PowerPoint presentation. But then that effectively becomes a crutch sometimes. You find yourself looking at the PowerPoint. Has anyone ever used a PowerPoint presentation before? Raise your hand. Now keep that hand raised if you find yourself looking at it for far too long. If you start reading off the slide, if you stare at it instead of looking at your audience. And that's one of the things that is very helpful to start ditching the PowerPoint and to start connecting with your audience. Second major thing is that a lot of what I'm about to say is just me. There's no fluff, there's nothing like that. I'm just going to go into tip after tip after tip. So let's begin. The first major thing about organizing your speech is why it's important. It's important because it makes the audience follow what you're saying. So instead of just going on a wild chase after something, your audience understands where you're going to go and how you're going to get there. This can be done in a few very important ways. The first off is something called a signpost. And no, this is not something that says, yield, speaker is about to get very boring. This is something that says, here's what I'm going to tell you. You may have noticed this today in some of our speakers. They don't just launch into something, they tell you, the next thing I'm going to tell you about is, I also wanted to speak about, when I was 7. Those are all signposts that lead you into something. The next thing that I want to talk about, which is a signpost, is a spotlight. And the spotlight normally comes at the end, where you say, if there's one thing you remember from my speech, it's... And that's a very powerful tool. You'll notice it, for example, in June's speech today, as she left us with an inspirational message, or in Noma's speech today, as he connected his experience of jumping around on the stage to all of us. And that is very powerful because when you organize your speech to have those kinds of setups, those kinds of messages built into the speech, it becomes very emotional, it becomes very connected. The second reason why organizing your speech is very important is that it becomes much easier to memorize. Have you ever tried to memorize anything before? Raise your hand. Now keep your hand raised if it was easy. You'll notice that when you try to memorize something, it's normally just a lot of facts that seem uninteresting to you, a lot of history dates, a lot of things that you don't really want to remember. But if you construct it in a logical way that makes sense to you, it suddenly changes from memorizing something that you don't really want to memorize, that's something different, to memorizing something that you already know, that you're already connected to. So it's also very helpful for memorization. Now let's talk about some organizational structures. There are a lot of organizational structures. For example, there's the classic problem solution, where you talk about a problem in our society, and then you offer a solution to that. Or perhaps it's the compare and contrast, where you talk about two different things. Or maybe it's the chronological one, where you talk about life events as they happen to you in order, one after one after one. There are a lot of different ones, but the key detail that I want to stress here is the rule of 3. Regardless of whatever you do, you want to have 3 main bullet points. Because when the audience walks out that door, they're only going to remember roughly 3 different things from your speech. And if you have 3 different details, 3 different examples, or 3 different pieces of evidence to support what you're saying, then the audience remembers what you're saying, and then they walk out of that door remembering your message. But beyond just those 3 points, you also need something else around it. You need your introduction and you need a conclusion. So when you write your speech, you create an introduction, you create your 3 main points, and then you create a conclusion. Doesn't that sound familiar, perhaps in an essay at school? But there's something different when it comes to speech writing. A lot of the times in school, you start off with the beginning of the speech, right? When you're writing an essay, you start off at the beginning of the essay. That's how it sounds, right? But in speaking, you don't do that. You start off with your 3 main points first. You start off with the body of your speech. Because once you craft what you're trying to say, the message, the main idea behind the speech, then you can start crafting a hook to get them involved, and an ending that will help them remember what you're saying. But when you're doing this, you also want to make sure that the hook is captivating. How many of you use cell phones today? And you'll find that the audience attention span is only around 8 seconds, which means if you don't get their attention in 8 seconds, you're probably not going to get their attention. So what that means is that you need to have a powerful hook. You need to have something that grasps the audience's attention immediately, especially in a large open setting with a lot of people where you can't connect with everyone and make eye contact as much. So when you do those kinds of speeches, you want to make sure that your hook is very, very intriguing. It should make the audience wonder, what is he going to talk about? Or what is she going to talk about? And from there, you transition into your 3 main points. These are all supported by evidence, by a story. These are the 3 aspects, the 3 reasons of what you're saying. And then finally, you want to end it with your conclusion. But when you give this conclusion, you want to do 2 things. The first, of course, is to summarize what you're talking about. But the second is to tie everything back together. And this is where the concept of something that I've talked about before of full circle comes in, where you don't want your introduction to be just a hook, but you want it to be tied back into the conclusion. I'm going to be giving some examples on how to do this and different ways that I've used this technique. But what happens is that when you end your speech, almost the same way that you started it, but you include a powerful message, perhaps just a sentence, perhaps just a phrase, and then you end your speech, your audience sits back and goes, wow, I now see how everything's connected, the introduction, the middle points, the ending. It's a very, very powerful tool. I'm going to give a quick example of how I've used this before. How many of the parents were at the open house? Actually, I was invited to the open house and I was requested to speak. So I used this very technique. Would any of the parents like to give a guess as to how I used it? If any of you remember? Alright, well, I'll give a quick recap of what I talked about. So this was an open house. This was introducing the wild pea. And there's a few different things that you want to think about when you are picking your organizational structure, when you are thinking about how you want to craft the speech. The first thing is the audience. So the audience for me was parents. It was not students, it was not people my own age, which meant that they were going to be concerned with how the wild pea was going to help them. That's probably what they wanted to know at that open house. The second thing is societal norm. I wanted to make sure that I didn't talk about anything that was dicey, which is why you'll often find that not many Toastmasters speak about things like politics or religion or anything else that can alienate your audience. That's something that you really do not want to do. And then finally, you have to think about yourself. You want to make sure that you're talking about something that you're interested in, because if you're not interested in it, your audience will clearly be able to tell. You'll find that you can't put the same sort of passion and the same energy into it that you could have if you were just interested in the topic. So I sat back and I thought, so how am I going to write this speech? And I went up to my table and I said, all right, I know that I want to start off with a hook. How am I going to get that? And I also knew that I wanted to really delve into 3 main points, but I was wondering, what should those 3 main points be? Because seeing that the YLP is important is just 1 point, that's not 3. So I thought to myself and I said, all right, I'm going to make the first point about me. I'm going to give a little explanation of who I am, how the YLP has helped me. And then I thought about it a little bit more and I said, parents often wonder, how is my kid going to be able to give their first speech? You'll notice that at the second session, you haven't really been exposed to many public speaking tips yet. Instead, you've just gone through a session on introduction to chairmanship, and you understand how a meeting looks, but you haven't learned much yet through many workshops. Which is why then I decided to give the second bullet on choosing and practicing for your speech. And then the third and final bullet point was another common question, which is about memorizing the speech. And with these 3 points in order, I had something of substance to give, but I also had a motivational message in store. Because if you'll notice, the second and the third points were really the meat of what I was going for, but the first point allowed me to create an opportunities motivational message. So I ended the speech, and of course, when I was crafting it, I thought of the ending first, because I thought about it and I said, I want to end with a motivational message about opportunity, about seizing every opportunity that you can. And then I sat back and I thought, all right, now how am I going to link it back together? And this is where something called a prop comes into use. A prop is something that's really powerful, not when it's just there for being there, but when it's a symbol, when it represents something. For example, I can pick up this highlighter and just show it to you as a prop, but it has no meaning because it doesn't convey anything to you. But in that specific speech, I decided to use a gavel. And not any gavel, this is a gavel that I won from the Model United Nations conference that was mentioned in my introduction. So I started off the speech by loudly announcing how the announcer built up to almost calling me, and then I cut it off right before they called my name. And then at the very end, I explained how that gavel was a symbol of opportunity, a symbol of motivation, and then I repeated the same thing, but then at the very end, I pulled out the gavel. And so if you'll notice, when something like that happens, that's what I mean by full circle. When the introduction of the speech links back to the conclusion, but you also have a motivational message, something for the audience to take away, included at the very end. So that's an example of what I mean. Are there any questions before I continue? No? All right, good. I want to do a quick exercise today. I've thought of a few topics, and this is mainly for the participants to try organizing. So I'm going to list an overall topic. I want you to consider, as though you were in the YLP, consider who your audience is, and I want us to narrow that broader topic into a subtopic that's more specific for the speech, 3 main points, an introduction and conclusion. Does that sound good? Good,
Yeah.
bad? I need some sort of verbal feedback.
Bring it on.
All right, good. The first topic is a very complicated one. It's cars. Would anyone like to offer any sort of subtopic? It can be anything. Yeah.
Hot Wheels.
Hot Wheels. I'm gonna write that. All right. What are some main points about Hot Wheels? What can we expect the audience to take away from this? Or maybe they don't. What is going on here?
They're very popular among the sub-12 age group, and they're usually used in conjunction with easily buildable racetracks.
So does this sound like an expository speech or more persuasive speech or motivational? What does it sound like to you?
Malachi, what do you think?
So does it sound like if you were to give a speech about Hot Wheels, you'd be explaining how they work and how they function? Or would you be persuading someone to buy it? Or would you be motivating someone to... Actually, I can't think of how to finish that. So,
Maybe the first one.
so you'd be explaining how Hot Wheels work. So this is going to be an expository speech. So that means that the 3 main points are going to be different aspects of Hot Wheels. Maybe you talk about specific cars that you like. And this, by the way, is a great example of using a prop. A prop would be very helpful here. All right, so let's start off with the first point. Floor is yours. What is something that we could talk about? Yes.
History of Hot Wheels.
That's a great one. The history of Hot Wheels. You can talk about how it was started. You can talk about all the different variations of Hot Wheels. Anyone have another point about Hot Wheels? Remember, these 3 points do not have to be connected. They just have to be in relation with
Accessories or what all you can do with them?
accessories. Before I go any further, is everyone in the room familiar with Hot Wheels? Forgot to ask that. Alright, so Hot Wheels are like little cars, and then you put them on tracks and they go down and you have fun playing with them, basically. That's about it. The third bullet point, what is...
How they got so popular.
Can you please repeat that?
How they got so popular.
Great. Now let's think about the introduction and the conclusion. When you do this, you want to make sure that you don't have to follow a specific structure and order. You can do the introduction first, you can do the conclusion first, it doesn't matter. So what's some general thoughts about how to grab someone's attention when you're talking about Hot Wheels? Especially considering that in the audience, not everyone's going to be interested in model cars.
You could sing the Hot Wheels theme song.
Tell a story about when you got your first Hot Wheels or...
How about this? Through the popularity of the history, and then let's insert a story. Stories are very, very powerful. I've mentioned this before, but stories allow you to connect with the audience, and they also, surprisingly, make it easy to remember. So now let's talk about how to end the speech. Keep in mind that you're singing. You're talking a lot about Hot Wheels, you're talking about their history, you're explaining what Hot Wheels are, you're explaining a personal story about Hot Wheels. How can you end the speech? Keeping in mind that you sang the Hot Wheels theme song at the very beginning.
Sing it again?
But before you just go into singing it again, what is a summary? What is a quick sentence summary of the 3 main points that you could walk out of the room with?
You could talk about a particular accessory that was popular throughout the history of Hot Wheels.
So that would go more in accessories. I mean, what is a general, overall summary, including the story, including the accessories, including the history and the popularity?
Comparing the Indy race with the high-speed Hot Wheels, the race cars.
Sure. So then you can talk about, you can explain how perhaps there's a history behind everything that we do, and we all have accessories in our own lives, and you can connect the story back. But regardless, does everyone understand what I'm trying to say when I mean organize your speech, right? You start off with your 3 main points, you think about how you're going to start the speech, and you think about how to end the speech. And this is a great speech. How many of you would not be excited when someone comes up, then they start singing a song, and then they talk about the history of Hot Wheels, and they talk about accessories, and then they ended off with a fun story about how maybe they got their first experience with Hot Wheels, or how they were first exposed, or maybe something funny about that, and then they ended it off by talking about how Hot Wheels is like all of us, or maybe something like that, or maybe connecting it to a race that happened recently, and then they ended off by singing. Wouldn't you love to hear that speech? Raise your hand. And that's what I mean by organizing your speech. It's not just about taking out a sheet of paper. That was meant to go there. It's not about taking out a sheet of paper and just drawing something out. It's about thinking about how you're going to put it, where you're going to put it, and why you're going to put it. I like to call those the 3 W's because how ends in a W. And if you take one thing away, it's not that you should spotlight like how I just did. It's instead that you want to make sure everything you include in your speech has a reason. You want to make sure that the audience walks out of that door remembering what you want them to remember. And if you use all the tips and techniques and tricks, I can guarantee it will work. I encourage all of you to take every single opportunity that you have and to pursue this. So that way not only will your speeches get more organized, more efficient, and better, they become more exciting, more invigorating. And even when you're just talking to your parents and your family and friends, you can even ask my dad how much more better I am after all these experiences. So I congratulate you all on already having progressed so much, and I look forward to seeing your progress when I come back to the 7th session. Thank you and congratulations.